A little while ago, my brothers and I were lucky enough to get a hold of our aunt's old Nintendo Entertainment System. Playing classic games on their original hardware was super cool, but I felt like the NES's hardware limitations were much more apparent in these games. You could very much see where the corners were cut and where optimizations were made. For example, with how little memory the cartridges had, it was impressive to even hear a singular voice clip. But these optimizations give a very unique charm to NES games that isn't really seen today. I'd like to try my hand at replicating that old NES style, so I opened up a new project in Godot and got to work. Now, I'm still relatively new to Godot, and there are a lot of things in the engine that I just still have not touched. But I knew that for this project, I really wanted to use a tile map, so I started there. I planned out a little maze and drew it out in black tiles. I then put collision hitboxes over all of these squares, but I later learned that this is more easily achieved by just connecting these tiles to a physics layer, so I switched to that method instead. Now, playing the same maze over and over again would get repetitive pretty fast. So to spice it up a bit, I overlaid some walls at certain points in the maze and had them randomly spawn in. That way, the maze feels just a little bit different every time. Onto the player, I made a very crude placeholder drawing for now, and coded up a simple movement script. I also made an enemy that navigates towards the player, and when they touch it, it crashes the game. We'll fix that later. But for now, I also added these boxes to the map and let the player pick them up. The game loop I have in mind is that you have to carry these boxes to the center of the screen to win, but if an enemy ever reaches you, it's game over. Now let's be honest, the game looks really ugly right now, so let's make some art. Since we're in a maze, my mind immediately went to corn mazes. I made some very pixelated corn tiles and animated a little farmer guy, and here's how the game looks with that. I then made gates to replace these black walls, sheep instead of these boxes, and wolves to serve as the enemies, and now the game looks much better. Now we're a rancher trying to shepherd his sheep while running away from a pack of wolves. But these wolves aren't really coordinating with each other. Since they all have the same pathfinding script, they all tend to just stack up on top of each other and effectively serve as just one wolf. As long as you don't back up into them, they're very easy to avoid. For some inspiration on this problem, I looked at Pac-Man, which is another game with enemies traversing a maze. Pac-Man solved this issue by coding different behaviors for all 4 of the ghosts. That way, the ghosts can coordinate and surround Pac-Man from all angles, instead of just from behind. So let's replicate this. The first enemy type is super basic, just chases the player directly. Nothing special, but it can easily coordinate with the rest of the enemies. The next one targets the wall that the player is facing. I achieved this by shooting a raycast from the player toward the direction they're facing. And once it hits a wall, the wolf will move to that position. However, if it ever has direct line of sight to the player, it'll chase you directly. This enemy type is usually good at attacking the player from the front, essentially cutting the player off while others corner you from behind. There's also one that targets the player's position, but only updates once it's finished its pathing, so there's sort of a delay to its chase. However, when you're close enough, it'll switch back to targeting you directly. I've noticed this one to be annoying when backtracking through an area, as it's always on your flank. Lastly, I made a more random one that wanders to any point on the map. And similar to the last one, it'll chase you only when you're close. This one is good at countering plays where you quickly move from one side of the map to the other. When you leave the other wolves behind, this one is often waiting for you in the new area. And those are the 4 enemy types I made for the game. And similar to Pac-Man, I gave them all different colored feet and gave them names. This new wolf pack is now a serious force to be reckoned with, so now let's give the player some tool to use to fight back. I'm really bothered by these gates being closed all the time, so how about we let the player open and close them, thus locking the wolves out. I made some new sprites and coded it up. I made the player freeze in place for a bit when opening the gate, so that you can't easily use it to escape the wolves, but closing it is nice and snappy. Now these gates can put more distance between the player and the wolf, forcing them to go around and take a much longer path. I also made some new sprite art for this fence area in the middle, so now the player can finally guide the sheep back to their pen. Once all 4 sheep are gathered, the game moves on to the next level, and the wolves begin to move faster. To keep up with the speed of the wolves, I slowly added more gates for the player to use as they reach higher levels. I think now is a good time to add some sound effects. I tried making my own 8-bit game music, but to no avail. Composing just isn't my strong suit. Thankfully, I found some good music on YouTube from a channel called Pix. I'll link it down below. I generated all of the sound effects using SFXR, and now here's how the game sounds. After a bit of deliberation, I landed on the format of giving the player 3 tries per level, and the sheep keep their position between lives. So if you're down to your last life, but only have 1 sheep left, you've still got a pretty good chance at winning. The last thing to make for the game is the title screen. I decided to name the game Ranch, and drew up a quick logo for it. Secret codes were also a big thing in the NES era, and so I decided to implement some of those. When pressing enter to start the game, if you hold right it'll mute the music, if you hold down it'll mute the entire game, and the most useful one, if you hold up it'll start the game on the last level you died on. And with that, the game is finally complete. You can play Ranch in your browser for free on my itch.io page. There will be a link in the description or the comment section waiting for you. I even drew a mock-up of the game's box art to put across the page. It's in the style of the black box NES games. I know that there's still a few bugs in the game, but I'm pretty happy with how it's turned out. Currently, I consider this project complete and don't have any intentions to work on it further. Instead, I'd like to move on to bigger and better projects. I'm also in college right now, and just don't have the time to refine every single aspect of the game. But if something arises, who knows? My mind could change. Also, I'm new to this whole YouTube thing, and I'm going to constantly try to improve my content. If you have any comments about my editing, script writing, or even tips about game development, please feel free to share. But for now, that's going to be it from me. See you next time.